Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Midnight is the Darkest Hour, a novel by Ashley Winstead, narrated by Sarah Welborn. 1. Now. 5 hours and 46 minutes after a trapper pulls the skull from the depths of Starry Swamp, shaking sludge and Spanish moss out of its eye sockets, the entire town of Bottom Springs, Louisiana, all 5,229 Christian souls and the small handful of godless heathens, has heard the news. Once again, they whisper, a person has been claimed by the swamp. But days later, Sheriff Thomas Theriot holds a press conference. Sheriff Thomas Theriot has not held a press conference once in his 30 years of service to the law. In Bottom Springs, there's never been a need. So this morning, when he stands outside his office with the reporter from the Trufiette Town Talk, flanked by his 2 deputies, the entire town comes to see it. There have been people lost to the swamp for as long as there have been people living in Bottom Springs. But this press conference means something's different. Even the ones who weren't waiting for it, who haven't, like me, lain awake every night anticipating this moment, are drawn out like a spell from the Dollar General and Piggly Wiggly and Old Man Jonas's bait and tackle shop. They gather in close quarters on Main Street, some nearly hovering, the better to hear. They know Sheriff Thomas Theriot as Tom, or simply the sheriff, but today he stands unusually rigid in his law enforcement regalia, his mud-brown uniform with its pins and patches. He carries an air of authority that makes him feel like a stranger, like some big city cop, not our small-town, small-time sheriff. "Good morning, and thank you for coming," he booms, kicking things off with a gesture of politeness, which is our way. That, in the thickness of his accent, is a comfort, a reassurance that, despite his strangely formal stance, he is still one of us. "I'm afraid I have troubling news to share today." Unease ripples through the crowd. This is Southern Baptist country, and people are prone to unease, apocalyptic and overly associative, seeing holy warnings in the smallest of things, like the pattern sugar makes when spilled across a counter. My father is where you'd expect him, in the middle of the crowd, the tallest person here, thick, tanned, and already gleaming in his cuffed white dress shirt. As the sheriff speaks, the hands of the townsfolk find my father until he looks like a massive sun radiating spokes of people. They lay their palms on his shoulders and forearms as if he is an anchor, his holiness a shield to protect them from the coming news. I cannot recall ever touching or being touched by my father that gently. I watch from the back, alone and invisible as always. An ominous feeling seeps through my veins like silty black mud. It has been seeping since the moment I heard whispers about the skull from Nisa, my colleague at the town library. June 17th, at approximately 4:32 p.m., the sheriff says, while one of my deputies was responding to a vandalism issue in Starry Swamp. He stops when the crowd titters, heads whipping to one another, eyes flashing. We haven't heard this part of the story. Like everyone else, I frown. Vandalism in the swamp. The sheriff raises his voice and continues. A trapper reported he'd found human remains in the water, caught up in one of his nets. Murmurs erupt from the throng. They know this information, but there's something about hearing it from a man in uniform with a carefully stoic face that feels weighted. It hits me, too, like a punch to the gut. Those with their hands on my father tighten them, gripping him for support. Near the edge of the crowd, gray-haired Mrs. Otten, the town tailor, sways on her feet. "What kind of remains?" Old Man Jonas calls. "How many pieces?" There are stains on his overalls from a morning spent packing bait. Some tisk at the indelicate question, But it's old man Jonas, so he will be forgiven. Sheriff Tirio holds out his hands for quiet. I'm sorry to say the trapper pulled a human skull out of the swamp. As of now, that's all we've been able to recover. A head with no body. People turn to gape at each other, wanting to see their horror mirrored, but not me. In the farthest reaches of the crowd, I am silent and dry-eyed. Dry as kindling, in fact. I alone know that whatever information the sheriff holds, he holds it like a lit match poised over my head. It was lucky we happened to be there responding to the vandalism, the sheriff adds, almost as an afterthought, the Louisiana storyteller in him cropping up despite the somber moment. Trapper said he might have thrown it back in the water if he hadn't spotted the law around the bend. 1,000 threads of fate, then, weaving together to pull the skull out of the dark water and into the light. 1,000 things conspiring for this day to come to pass. What are the odds? My mind whispers, and though I've instructed myself to remain blank of mind, of all the things I could be thinking, at least it's probably the safest. My father is only feet away, which means the Holy Spirit is here in this town square, listening. It was God's will, someone calls, and the crowd murmurs its assent. Some of them have started swaying, moving to a message from the Creator only they can hear, like they're back in church. The town talk reporter clears his throat. Is it your opinion someone got lost out there, or are we talking about another alligator attack like the one last year? My body is incandescent with fear. Be a gator. For the first time, exhaustion carves the sheriff's face. Yesterday, we received word from the coroner in Forsyth that the skull belongs to a male, aged 25 to 50, and the fracturing on the bone is consistent with blunt force trauma. The crowd goes silent. My heart pounds so fast I want to crack my sternum and release it. The skull's been bashed in, the sheriff clarifies, his drawl deepening. This man did not die by gators. He was the victim of a brutal beating. I'm here today to announce we're opening the parish's first homicide investigation in 20 years. There's a strangled cry as gray-haired Mrs. Otten succumbs, fallen to her knees. Some townsfolk rush to pull her up, but the rest devolve into chaos. They shout, imploring the sheriff for more information, imploring my father to intervene. A woman carrying a small child on her hip, who I know only as one of the Fort Knott fishing wives, starts to weep. Homicide investigation. Those were the words I was waiting for. Inside me, the fire catches and erupts. No one can see it, but I'm standing in the middle of Main Street, burning alive. The flames of hell have finally reached me like my father always warned. Calm down, the sheriff booms, his voice rising above the fray. I need you to listen. The two deputies flanking him, old Roy McLaren and young Barry Holt, straighten and finger the sticks at their belts as if they might jump into the crowd to force everyone's silence. Barry's troubled gaze searches faces until he finally lands on mine. He gives me a grim, tight-lipped smile. I have no idea what expression I make back. My body is on fire, and I can feel nothing else. This is all the information we have, says the sheriff, voice still straining. We'll update you as soon as we identify the victim. In the meantime, I need any and all information you might have about the homicide. If you know something, anything, tell us. We'll follow every lead. Consider this a plea. His gaze skims the crowd until it stops at my father. They hold each other's eyes. A darkness passes over the sheriff's face. And I must also ask for your prayers. Evil has come to Bottom Springs. The crowd explodes at this, one of the older women wailing. The sheriff and his deputies turn their backs and stride into their office, trailed by the reporter. In their absence, my father takes command, lifting his arms to the heavens. I can see only the back of his head, his coal-black, slicked-back hair, the dark sweat staining his dress shirt. But I've seen this gesture enough times to know what expression he's wearing. "Let us pray," he shouts, "for the soul of this poor, murdered man." He staggers down to his knees in the middle of the street. Like a contagion, the people around him fall too, a movement that ripples until the whole crowd is braced against the ground. May God reveal the wicked soul responsible for this gruesome act, the soul who has betrayed God's holiest commandment. The crowd raises their arms like he does, tilting their heads to the sky, imploring their Creator. May Christ deliver us from the demon who walks among us even now. I cannot be here, cannot watch them prostrate themselves before my father, cannot contain the grief threatening to erupt. I turn and flee, moving as quickly as I dare, knowing I cannot draw attention. I need to get home to my garden, to my refuge, where I can think. I'm digging up weeds in my backyard, skin filmed with dirt and sweat, when I feel the change. The air thickens, becoming so heavy and warm I can close my eyes and sink into it like into bath water. The wild green of the forest at the edge of my yard gives itself over to the heat in one great big exhalation. I smell verdant herb in the air, can practically taste it on my tongue, spicy and mineral. In that moment, all around me, spring shudders into summer. I still instinctively clutch in the trowel. My eyes find the horizon, a spark lighten in my chest. He used to come every year on the first true day of summer, every year except the last. Deep in my bones, I can feel it. He will come with dusk. Time passes in a blur until I find myself sitting barefoot at my kitchen table, watching the tree branches dance outside the window. The sheer curtains are twisting as the breeze blows through the screen and it ruffles my white dress. My hair is wet from the shower and combed back from my forehead like my mother used to do when I was a child. Moisture from the shower still clings to my skin, and the white cotton sticks. I want to pull it from me, but outside my front door, the wind chime tangles, a soft silver melody, and I rise to my feet. The promise of a summer storm hangs thick in the air outside the screen door. The sun is fighting death, reaching out with grasping fingers of orange and rose against the falling twilight. When I push open the screen door, there's a sharp glimmer of light, and there he is, standing on my porch like the wild has conjured him. He's grinning the same grin he used to give me when we were teens. Fitting, because although he's grown more solid and slightly taller, he's never really aged. The grin is lazy and confident, with a wickedness he would never dare show anyone else. He's a head taller than me, and his skin is too lustrous, too milky white for a boy born and raised here in Bottom Springs, where the sun beats unrelentingly most of the year. Instead of tanned and freckled like mine, his skin glows like a pearl, like trapped moonlight. His hair is dark and tangled, and his eyes are darker, the kind of dark that sucks you in. When I was younger, I used to draw him with my charcoal pencils, trying to capture the flinty sharpness of his cheekbones, how they knife down, pulling your eyes to the fullness of his lips. But I could never get him right. Every picture I drew made him look otherworldly and menacing, halfway feral. In those pictures, you could almost see why so many around here call him the devil's son. He's letting me take him in, that grin showing off the sharp points of his canines, his smile echoing in his eyes. He leans against the wooden door frame, shoulder to the peel and paint, and looks at me too, starting with my bare feet and traveling up until he meets my eyes. Between his look and the pressin' heat, it's like the world is reaching out to touch me with phantom caresses. My pain has called him here, surely, called and pulled him here.
Ruth.
His nostrils flare as if catching a scent.
Something's wrong. Your house smells different. Tell me quick. Are you safe?
No. I remained still, fingernails digging into the door, carving half moons. My voice is thick. Listen to me. It's finally happened. They found him in the swamp. 2. June. 17 years old. I was 17 when I went on my first date, much later than the other girls. Since courting for marriage is one of the only forms of entertainment we've got down here in Bottom Springs, and bored girls in small towns are inclined toward entertainment, we tend to start quick. But, late or not, it was a miracle I had a date at all. For one thing, my father is Pastor James Cornier, preacher at Holy Fire Born Again, and spiritual leader to every soul in True Fayette Parish, minus the handful of godless heathens. Not many boys want to date a preacher's daughter, and rightfully so. After all, in towns like ours, it's best to keep your vices, your underage drinking and late-night fumbling in the back seat, as far from prying eyes as possible. But mostly, it was a miracle because of who I am all on my own. If you were to ask around about Miss Ruth Cornier, you'd hear the same story. Miss Ruth Cornier, they tell you, is a good, God-fearing girl, not a lick of trouble, raised by two upstanding, cane-wielding pillars of the community, but intensely shy to the point of muteness, to the point of not being able to function when spoken to. A girl who grows red-faced and stuttering upon too forward a glance. A wisp of a girl. Someone who haunts the background of photographs, unlikely to look a boy in the eyes, let alone date one. And they were right. I was shy, but mostly I was lonely. While everyone respected my parents, they also feared them. Especially my father, who held the power to damn sinners to hell and used it frequently. My mother held a different kind of power. She was nearly as quiet as I was, at least in public, but in private her judgment was harsh, her tongue legendary, her whisper campaigns the kind that saw entire families shunned from potlucks and Sunday services over a single member's wrongdoing. If anyone in Bottom Springs assumed life inside the Cornier house was different, that within the private walls of our two-story clapboard the three of us shared a special familial intimacy, that my parents granted me a leniency and tenderness they gave no one else, the kind of loving indulgence a mother might give a naughty child who snagged a sucker from the grocery store, they would be wrong. There were moments of tenderness when I was young, evenings when my father would allow me to rest my head on his knee while he read, mornings when my mother's fingers would soften and slow as they combed through my hair. But these were fleeting moments. Dandelion seeds in my palm, lost the second I stopped clutching. For the most part, there was no one my parents watched closer than me, looking for any hint of immorality or wantonness. And when they found one, there was no person on earth they would send to hell quicker. Hell being 12 lashes with my father's rattan cane, followed by a week locked inside my bedroom. It was therefore wise to be a wisp, even if my severe quietness meant that at school I was as unpopular and friendless as poor Samuel Landry, whose Tourette syndrome made him a target for the crueler students, and Everett Duncan, whose ratty clothes, intense stare, and stubborn refusal to answer questions when called upon made it clear he was following in the footsteps of his ne'er-do-well father, one of the town's chief church shirkers. But it hardly mattered that no one invited me to drink Coors Light out in Starry Swamp on Saturdays. My whole life I'd tried in timid overtures to find other people I could relate to, someone to call a friend, but I'd always failed. In such a small town, the pickings were slim. I wasn't my parents' kind of girl, not on the inside, but I wasn't anyone else's either. So instead of friendships, I cultivated quiet rebellions. Most came in the form of books. At Sacred Surrender High School, the library was tightly controlled by the church elders. It contained no suggestive books, no books that glorified sins like rebelling against one's parents or sex before marriage. But most of all, it contained no occult. No boy or girl wizards or tales of monsters or werewolf love stories. The occult was a particular sticking point with my father, because around here, the only belief system that had ever competed with religion was superstition. The only things parishioners had ever feared as much as God were the evils said to roam around us. In fairness, Bottom Springs does look like the Creator had built it with the otherworldly in mind. Though I have only our neighboring towns to compare to, Forsyth and Trouville to the east and Homa to the north, I've always felt Bottom Springs must be the most beautiful place on earth. Here at the tip of Louisiana, it's as if the sky and swamp and wild green trees know holy fire demands we lead staid, ascetic lives and try to make up for it, giving us all the splendor and decadence we aren't supposed to want. Sunrises and sunsets are riots of color, the Gulf sapphire blue, the black swamp laced with velvet green lily pads, tall trees almost floating out of the depths. Trees everywhere, in fact, bending over dirt roads, embracing the shore, and thick as a wall of centuries in the woods, dripping with Spanish moss. All this beauty stirs the soul, making one feel the pinprick presence of another order. God, perhaps, but maybe also something darker. Secret beings with lives that unfold in the slivers between trees, whose slitted eyes blink open at night in the depths of the swamp, yellow and ancient as alligators. One story in particular has haunted Bottom Springs for as long as anyone can remember. It tells of a creature whose true name is so hoary and evil that men's minds can't contain it, and so we call him the Low Man. Cursed to remain trapped in Bottom Springs by men who practice spiritual magics now long forgotten, the Low Man slumbers for all eternity in the deep, dark heart of the swamp, in a place no trapper or hunter has ever set foot. Every few years, the story goes, he wakes and rises from his underwater tomb to roam Bottom Springs, searching for a way out, seeking to be let loose upon the world in order to devour it. Furious at his imprisonment, the Low Man settles for devouring us instead. He takes the shape of a beautiful man, a trap for sinners as seductive as a coral snake's bright rings. The Low Man can see into your heart, see your true wickedness, and once he's marked you, whether it's hours, days, or years later, one night he will slip in through your window. He'll sink his fangs into your neck like a rough kiss and feast, not only on your body, dismembering the cage that contains you, but on your soul. There is no heaven or hell waiting for those slaughtered by the Low Man, only the worst fate of all, which is nothingness, which is to be reduced to a sparkless, nerveless thing, a bag of flesh that rots and stinks and then ceases to exist. While the myth of the Low Man had fallen out of regular mention by the time I grew up, Men still told stories after they'd had a few too many wild turkeys at the Blue Moon Bar, describing how they'd seen him slip into the shadows between houses when they were young, felt his cold presence when they ventured too deep into the swamp. Children still checked the locks on their windows before they went to bed and stared hard at any man with the face too close to beautiful. And the threat of something old and hungry in the swamp lent an extra sense of thrill to the parties teenagers threw there. Once, I'd wondered which scared the people of Bottom Springs more, the low man or the devil. This, of course, was a problem for my father, who felt God should have the monopoly on fear. So the school library was tightly restricted, youths' minds protected, and that meant it was no place for me. But in the town library, a small brick building off Main Street with the roof steepled like a church, sometimes an illicit book would find its way in. One of my greatest blessings was that the library was perpetually underfunded. Without a healthy budget, it relied on donations, often cardboard boxes stuffed with bent paperbacks and the occasional stray t-shirt meant for goodwill. Even more occasionally, parishioners would forget to scour through their stacks to take out anything damning. By the time I turned 14, I'd gotten my hands on a Danielle Steele and the 2nd and 5th Percy Jacksons that way, all haphazardly pulled out of donation boxes and stuck onto the shelves. While the librarians were sometimes careless, I was always alert, books being my only lifeline. I was as hungry for stories as the low man was for souls, devouring every book that wasn't a spiritual, each one proof another world existed outside the one I knew. I believe at one point I'd read every book available in town. I used to smile at how misguided my father was, thinking the classics he allowed, Wuthering Heights and Great Expectations and The Age of Innocence, had nothing to teach about rebellion. I learned to question and rage and self-immolate over love alongside Heathcliff and Pip and Newland Archer. And then I found Twilight. The copy was wedged into a shelf of spy novels. It was a miracle I happened to spot it. A miracle I had the courage to take it to the farthest corner of the library and read it in the shadows, chapter by chapter, returning day after day since I never could check it out. It was the ultimate contraband, a story both occult and romantic, and meant for girls like me. In Bella, I found a mirror. We were both shy and overlooked, with the smallest of lives, hemmed in by circumstances outside our control. And in Vampire Edward, I found everything I'd ever wanted in a man. He loved Bella with single-minded devotion, a self-effacing passion beyond anything a human man was capable of. That's, in turn, how I loved him. I read the novel 5 times in the span of a month, then spent months after fruitlessly searching the stacks for the sequel teased at the end. Eventually, I committed the crime of shoving the book in my backpack and bringing it home. At the time, it was the worst thing I'd ever done. The night I stole it, I woke at midnight in a cold sweat, sure the low man, or at least my father, would come hunting for me. Twilight was the bridge to my second rebellion, an obsession with the kind of love my father rarely talked about in church. The kind where you felt all the overwhelming awe you were supposed to feel for Jesus, but for another person. It fascinated me. Though I prayed to God every night and believed he was listening, I'd never felt particularly close. I'd never felt close to another person either. And of the two connections, I wished for the person more. Ruth Cornier, the preacher's daughter, coveted a boy's love more than God's. That was another secret I hid in my muteness. I found Twilight at 14. By the time I was 17, There was no girl in the world more willing to be consumed by love. I even had a favorite daydream. My hair, long, wavy, and copper, was the one thing about me worth attention. It was unprecedented in our family, mine alone. I used to imagine a boy combing his hands through it.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?